An alien showed me how the Anunnaki built Egypt. The truth about the pyramids will shock you. You will not just hear a theory, you will be guided through an experience that rewrites what stones do to flesh and memory, and you will feel why those who touch certain thresholds are never the same again. Dr. Aaron Mitchell, 47 years old, field archaeologist and once a rising star in geomorphological mapping, had his reputation quietly fragmented after he published a series of anomalous readings from Giza that no peer would replicate. He slept in a cluttered apartment above a tea house, surrounded by notebooks full of measurements and sketches, and he carried the ache of a lost partnership and a younger sister he had not seen in years. One humid night in Cairo, while poring over spectral scans, a fracture of light unfolded in the corner of his study, and a presence entered without sound, not speaking in words but folding images and pulses into his mind. It did not ask, it offered. It reached into a memory he had not yet lived and offered a journey that would show him the machinery behind the monuments, the biological protocols encoded in stone, and the reason entire scholarly disciplines had ignored the sensory signatures these sites still emitted. He could decline. He did not. In seconds, his consciousness was elsewhere. He would return with cadences in his bones and a mission in his mouth. If you want the full technical appendix and the map of sites we discuss, look to the guide linked in the first comment and subscribe now because this evidence is time-sensitive and contested. Brace yourself. What follows will challenge everything you thought about history and about your own body. Aaron had been prepared for fieldwork since childhood when his father, a hydrogeologist, taught him to listen to rock for water. As a boy, he learned to recognize how different stones hummed when struck and how heat pooled near faults. He studied at Cambridge and later at the American University in Cairo, where he learned to read strata and to read people, both skills that would later make him insist on the anomalous data that cost him collegial favor. His early career was marked by precise surveys and a patient curiosity. He married young, and the marriage dissolved quietly under the weight of his absences. The loss that shadowed him was not only personal. In his late 30s, a paper he co-authored suggesting non-random acoustic properties in certain megalithic structures was dismissed as speculative, and he was removed from a grant without explanation. That professional ostracism hardened him and also opened a space in which extraordinary experiences could be allowed to enter. He spent years cataloging reports from local guides who described sensations of pressure or hearing in tomb corridors, and he learned Arabic to speak directly to those who tended the sites. He built friendships with a small constellation of people who believed, among them Layla. Hassan, an Egyptologist who ran a small independent dig, Omar Farouk, a lifelong guide born on the edge of the Western Desert, Maria N. Gallo, a physicist who specialized in piezoelectric minerals, Jamal Reed, a documentary photographer with steady hands, Elena Korsakov, a linguist who read archaic lists of offerings and ritual directives, Amira, a healer who had a practice near Luxor, Nasir, a retired stonemason who remembered old cutting techniques, and Hakim, a weathered sailor on the Nile who knew currents and submerged memory. These figures became necessary because the work Aaron was invited to witness demanded multidisciplinary trust and a willingness to be unmade. The apparition began in sensory fragments that Aaron experienced as both loss and clarity. At first, he felt a low vibration under his feet, the kind he had felt near fault lines, and then a shaft of cold light slid across his records without disturbing the papers. He did not hear a voice. He heard instead a sequence of tones and images pressed into his awareness like notes on a plate. The presence shaped a map of aligned pillars and then folded the map into the geometry of a palm. A conversation unfolded without voices. The being projected what it called its purpose, and in those projections appeared faces that resembled the reliefs Aaron had studied, yet moved with the restless precision of a machine. The being asked nothing that Aaron could resist. It extended an invitation to travel back to moments of construction, not to observe as a spectator, but to inhabit an initiator who would be shown protocols, frequencies, and biological couplings with stone. "Why me?" flashed in Aaron's mind, in a phrase that the being answered not with explanation but with memory images of his childhood learning to hear stone. He felt gratitude and dread. The offer included a guarantee that the journey would be experiential and repeatable inside certain sites. When Aaron accepted, fields of color resolved into an interior of warm light, and the world wound backward. In the reconstruction, the Nile was different, wider, and filled with vessels whose hulls cut through reed scent and tar smoke. The first major scene Aaron entered was a quarry, where crews he recognized as partly human and partly something else directed slabs with a choreography beyond known levers. There was dirt under nails, yes, but also an ordered hum that came from the stones themselves when they were tautened by embedded crystals. Prepare for dialogue, because these encounters were not solitary visions, but meetings with workers and overseers whose speech Aaron could convert into the languages he knew. In a shaded courtyard, he overheard an exchange between an overseer whose cadence had a metallic undertone and a stonemason. "We need a perfect seam," the overseer said. "The ear will speak only across that seam," replied the mason. "How do you know the seam?" asked a young apprentice. "Because the stone sings to the seed we place," said the overseer. An apprentice touched a polished capstone and immediately paled. "It is the capstone that remembers," said the overseer. The apprentice whispered, "Will it hurt the men?" And the overseer answered, "It reshapes them into parts of the circuit. They will lose certain memories, but gain function." This sequence expanded into a longer conversation at a nearby chamber where Aaron watched workers align slabs by matching micro-frequencies. The exchanges around him paced like a ritual and yet had technical specificity. "Tune it," Maria Angolo said to a worker who adjusted a crystalline embedment. "We need 3 hertz more at the base to align the microchannels." 3 hertz and the pineal will waken those who pass," answered Layla. "Not awaken," corrected a voice that sounded older and shaped like memory. "Recouple." The dialogue moved between practical instruction and profound direction, consisting of 8 to 10 turns as the scene unfolded, and Aaron realized this was not magic, but applied bioacoustics. The construction scenes required dense sensory description because the technology was not merely visual. The quarry smelled of wet limestone and pitch and the tang of metal filings. The apprentice touched a polished capstone and immediately paled. "It is the capstone that remembers," said the overseer. The apprentice whispered, "Will it hurt the men?" And the overseer answered, "It reshapes them into parts of the circuit. They will lose certain memories but gain function." This sequence expanded into a longer conversation at a nearby chamber where Aaron watched workers align slabs by matching microfrequencies. The exchanges around him paced like a ritual and yet had technical specificity. "Tune it," Maria Angolo said to a worker who adjusted a crystalline embedment. "We need 3 hertz more at the base to align the microchannels." 3 hertz and the pineal will waken those who pass," answered Layla. "Not awaken," corrected a voice that sounded older and shaped like memory. "Recouple." The dialogue moved between practical instruction and profound direction, consisting of 8 to 10 turns as the scene unfolded, and Aaron realized this was not magic but applied bioacoustics. The construction scenes required dense sensory description because the technology was not merely visual. The quarry smelled of wet limestone and pitch and the tang of metal filings. The air tasted faintly of copper and ozone when certain blocks were struck. Workers wore linen dusted with stone powder that clung like talc to skin. Hands were calloused and precise. Sounds registered in the chest as much as the ear because the stones resonated at frequencies that interacted with human bone and tissue. Heat pooled under the sun and contrasted with the coolness of the chambers once sealed. The 5th sense came alive in the sense of timing. The workers moved in breathless synchrony, and at moments the whole quarry pulsed as if breathing together. These 5 or 6 sensory notes repeated in other scenes to anchor the reader to the physical reality of a place that modern visitors too often perceive only as inert. Aaron was taken deeper into a process that looked like ritual but functioned as a protocol for activating organic matter. Inside a nearly completed pyramid, he watched the placement of the capstone, a process described by a series of careful trades between priest engineers and stonecutters. "Lift it here," said an overseer to the mason. "Slowly," said the mason. "Hold the tone," said the priest. "Hold the tone," repeated the apprentice. "Now bind the seed," murmured another voice. The capstone settled and the air changed. There was a pressurization like a lung being closed, and a scent of resin and a metallic tang. An initiated subject stood within a smaller chamber, and the priests placed mineral nodes along his skull and clavicle. They spoke sequences, each exchange natural and precise. Seed 1, seed 2, breathe 2, let frequency 3 flow. Hold, resonance achieved, record the change, seal. The initiated shuddered as cellular remembers were unlocked and some older memories dissolved in the surfacing of pattern recognition. This scene allowed 8 to 10 dialogue exchanges at length, where the priests debated tone and sequence and corrected each other with technical exactitude. The initiated felt warm and cold, tasted iron and sweet resin, smelled incense and earth, heard a high ringing in the teeth, and felt the hairs along the arms stand as the frequency of the capstone married his body. Here the narrative described microscopic change, a process the alien showed Aaron in close-up, where molecular arrays of protein folded differently under vibrational strain and where DNA segments aligned to a field produced by specific mineral lattices. The technical explanation the alien offered, and Aaron later recorded, was not mystical but procedural, and it must be described plainly. Certain stones used in capstones contain trace piezoelectric minerals that when stressed produce microvoltages. Those microvoltages interact with saline tissue and fluid channels in the body to create coherent oscillations in neural clusters that include the pineal complex. The process required 3 elements: alignment, geometry, specific mineral composition, and timed acoustic infusion. First, a capstone with a lattice of quartz and rare copper mica must be placed with an offset of less than a fraction of a degree. Second, the adjacent chambers must form a resonant cavity tuned to approximately 432 Hz, scaled by local gravitational anomaly. Third, living subjects must be present who carry a baseline bioelectric field that can be entrained. The operation required precision cutting methods to avoid microfractures and a method to amplify weak piezo signals into coherent neural entrainment. The procedural sequence Aaron witnessed was summarized later in his notes as a 7-step protocol that fit into 300 characters each when reduced to lab shorthand, but that in practice relied on human touch and ritual to keep the timing exact. This compact description gives the plausible technical outline that transforms myth into engineered procedure. After viewing construction and initiation, Aaron was moved along the Nile into a system of temples, each with a specific function, forming a larger integrated network that the alien called a grid. The first temple was a house of aligning, where the body's rhythm was tuned to the river pulse. Visitors felt their heartbeats synchronize with low drums until they could feel the river within their veins. Exchanges among temple attendants were frequent, small dialogues with 8 to 10 turns as pilgrims described sensations and priests adjusted tones. The second temple functioned as a clearing where traumatic biographic traces were diffused into stone. Here, descriptions of salt on tongues and of cold water poured over limbs repeated and anchored the sensory experience. The third temple was of encoding, where symbols were embossed into clay and then pressed into contact with the skin to transfer micro-residues that registered in cellular memory. The fourth was a house of resonance, where sound bowls and pierced chambers allowed frequencies to pass through marrow and reset predictable stress responses.
The fifth temple functioned as a departure corridor, where travelers learned to carry new rhythms into the ordinary world. Each temple had a distinct scent palette and a set
of tactile practices, and each produced different bodily after-effects noted by Aaron and his companions. The path of these sites followed the Nile and connected to other nodal points in the eastern deserts and to islands of aligned sites that together formed a continent-wide system of recovery and augmentation. Not everyone agreed, and not every scene was serene. Moments of tension rose when Aaron encountered resistance, both ancient and modern. In one tense moment, the alien showed him how a flawed activation could fracture identity and leave a subject dissociated and wandering. The scene cut to a narrow chamber where technicians argued in heated whispers over whether to proceed. "The frequency is off," said one. "We cannot delay. If we proceed now, the subject will be split," warned a voice with the cadence of experience. For a full 2 pages of vision, the argument escalated into accusations about protocol negligence and the risk to the community whose memories would be altered. The tension peaked when tools slipped and a shard cut a thumb, drawing a line of blood that thinned the field. In panic, the overseers recalibrated and averted catastrophe, but the risk was visible and visceral. In another tense episode in the present day, Aaron returned repeatedly to find institutional gates closed. He presented measured data to officials who responded with bureaucratic silence and then with active suppression. He received 2 formal letters denying access and 1 anonymous warning suggesting that public exposure would be unhelpful to social stability. These threats produced both internal and external conflict as Aaron struggled to balance disclosure with care for subjects who might be vulnerable. There were legal steps and private pleas, and at one point a brittle phone call with Layla when she said, "You will lose everything if you push this," to which he answered, "I already lost what mattered if I do not try." Throughout the journey, Aaron named and met several secondary figures who became both support and friction, and who acted in concrete ways. Layla Hassan documented architectural alignments and argued for thermographic surveys. Omar Farouk guided access routes and translated oral histories that included songs of activation. Maria Angolo collected mineral samples and described their crystalline anisotropy. Jamal Reed filmed with an old shoulder camera, catching shadows and details that later proved crucial. Elena Korsakoff cataloged ritual phrases that in their original language aligned with vibration instructions. Amira worked with visitors who reported after effects and established safe reintegration practices. Nasir taught methods of stone dressing that minimized fracture, and Hakim recorded river currents and seasonal changes relevant to timed ceremonies. Each of these characters reacted to developments with distinct choices. Layla risked her grant to protect Aaron. Omar navigated bribes to secure nighttime passages. Maria argued fiercely about reproducibility and later campaigned to create a lab-analyzed sample set. Jamal leaked imagery to a journalist who then retreated when threatened. Elena found ancient lists referencing capstone carriers. Amira developed a recovery routine that Aaron would later use on troubled subjects. Nasser and Hakim provided lived practical knowledge that tied technology to environment and labor. The alien also revealed 5 core truths that became a backbone for Aaron's later public synthesis. Truth 1, stone encodes procedure, not just symbol. Truth 2, frequency couples physiology to structure. Truth 3, the capstone acts as a memory node that can map and alter cellular record. Truth 4, the system was networked along waterways and trade routes to distribute effects. Truth 5, powers that benefit from static narratives have actively suppressed experiential knowledge. Aaron rehearsed these truths again and again because their simplicity hid a dangerous implication. The list of 5 truths was recited in the inner chamber like a litany, and each repetition deepened his conviction even as it made him a target.
Institutional resistance came in many forms: academic silence, grant denial, official discouragement, and, in one episode, a claim of data falsification that nearly ruined Maria professionally. The alien did not explain motive for suppression in human political terms, but offered a pattern the being had observed, where centralized control prefers predictable subjects to unpredictable awakenings. When Aaron returned publicly, he was not the same man. The journey transformed him into an initiated messenger carrying practical instructions and warnings. He published a measured report with diagrams and invited controlled visits to certain sites where volunteers underwent monitored experiences. Early participants reported changes: altered sleep cycles, sudden clarity about long-forgotten dreams, and, in a few cases, the surfacing of ancestral memory. These results attracted both followers and detractors. Aaron began hosting small discussion circles and radio interviews. Synchronicities multiplied. An old friend from graduate school called to confess she had once been in a ritual where similar tones had been used. Letters arrived from strangers describing uncanny sensations in distant ruins. He created an online repository, and in the first comment, he pinned a technical guide for those wanting to explore safely. He encouraged readers to share one-sentence accounts as community data. The CTA to the comments appeared as a deliberate pause, a third of the way through his public narrative, to gather patterns and to build a network of witnesses. The comment invitation was simple and explicit. If this touched you, write in one line where it happened and describe the sensation beginning with "I felt." Aaron stressed that contributions would be anonymized and used to identify nodes of consistent resonance. There were moments of terror as well as revelation. In one intense confrontation, investigators from a cultural authority attempted to confiscate Maria's samples and Jamal's tapes. A standoff ensued at the dock, with voices raised and a crowd of locals watching the vans under the Nile light. "You cannot take these," Layla said. "This belongs to history," said an official. "Not everything that belongs to history remains neutral," answered Aaron. The exchange escalated into threats and then into a trail of legal filings that lasted months. At the same time, personal
dramas unfolded as friends debated whether continued exposure to resonant frequencies could harm vulnerable subjects. Amira counseled caution and recommended gradual protocols. "We must not treat people as experiments," she told Aaron. "We never did," he said quietly, but the question haunted the group. The tension of public exposure and the moral hazard of applying ancient technology to modern bodies became one of the central ethical battlegrounds of Aaron's work. The epilogue itself unfolded in 3 timeframes that traced the aftermath of disclosure and the formation of a fragile community. 1 month later, Aaron had organized a small retreat on the west bank of the Nile, attended by 20 people, including Layla, Omar, Maria, Jamal, Elena, Amira, Nasir, and Hakim. The retreat was a safe protocol trial with monitoring and a debrief each evening. Participants reported altered dream recall and a shared sensation of river memory that they described as both sorrow and longing for repair. 1 month also brought a press piece that framed Aaron as a fringe theorist and drew hostile commentary that forced institutions to publicly dissociate from his claims. Despite the backlash, a small cohort of practitioners formed a closed study group that agreed on ethical guidelines for future activations. 3 months after the first public talk, a network map of nodal sites had been sketched by Layla and Maria, showing alignments along the Nile with satellite overlays. The map included less-known temples, quarry sites, and a set of river islands that had not previously been linked. A petition circulated online demanding transparency for research permits and the formation of an independent oversight committee composed of archaeologists, anthropologists, physicists, and community elders. This petition gathered signatures from several countries and drew sympathetic attention from independent presses. Aaron himself began teaching protocols in online sessions with strict vetting and a curriculum co-authored with Amira and Maria that emphasized consent, safety, and integration. At 3 months, a ritual of collective remembrance was held quietly on a river island with 30 participants who sang sequences that matched the reconstructed tonal protocols.
6 months after his initial disclosure, the movement had grown into an international community of several hundred engaged practitioners and scholars. The community had created a small archive of testimonies and a repository of safe practice guidelines, and it organized a modest pilgrimage to a cluster of aligned sites where scientists performed non-invasive monitoring. Some participants reported lasting changes in their perception and sleep architecture. Institutional pushback continued, but could not fully silence first-hand reports and reproducible field recordings that Maria and Jamal had collected. The epilogue closes with Aaron standing at the river at dawn, watching fog lift, and thinking of the 5 truths he had learned. He had lost certain comforts, but had gained a work that insisted on being tended. He invited viewers to consider what they had felt in ancient places and to participate in building a careful, ethical community. If this story resonated, subscribe to follow the archive and find the guide.
Remember this line and hold it. The stones were always alive, but they required hands that listened.